Hi, welcome to Crimes Against Humanity. My name's Maria Payan, and I'm Socially Responsible Agricultural Project's regional representative on the Lower Eastern Shore here in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We are a national nonprofit. We work directly with communities that are negatively impacted from industrial animal agricultural production. We advocate for ecologically sound, socially equitable, and economically viable animal agriculture. Today's webinar is being hosted by Socially Responsible Agricultural Project with our co-sponsors, Assateague Coastal Trust, Center for Progressive Reform, the Maryland chapter and the Lower Eastern Shore chapter of the Sierra Club, Wicomico County NAACP, Sentinels of Eastern Shore Health, and Sussex Health and Environmental Network. SESH and SHEN are a collaboration of grassroots citizens groups here on the Eastern Shore. We just held a month-long in-home screening event for the Right to Harm film. This was done by Hourglass Films, and the Right to Harm documents the poorest communities across rural America where citizens are being stripped of their basic human rights to clean air and clean water by a livestock industry that manipulates politics for corporate gain. Right to Harm is the story of everyday farmers and rural residents whose personal confrontations with factory farming have changed their lives forever. Instead of giving up, they decided to dig in, stand up, and fight for justice. Tonight, Crimes Against Humanity will address where we go from here for solutions. Jack Buconi from Blue Coast Talk will start us off with interviews from leading experts concerning public health impacts, agricultural economics, environmental justice, policy, and sustainable farming. This will be followed by a Q&A session by Michael Payan, which will be opened up after the presentations. Our presenters are Dr. Robert Lawrence. Dr. Lawrence is the Center for a Livable Future Professor Emeritus at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and the founding director of the Center for a Livable Future, which supports research and develops policies related to the public health impacts of industrial food animal production, improving food security, fulfilling the right to food, and adopting healthier diets. We will also be joined by Dr. John Ikerd. Dr. John Ikerd is a professor emeritus of agricultural economics at the University of Missouri. John was raised on a small dairy farm in southwest Missouri, and he received his PhD from the University of Missouri in 1970. The first half of his academic career was spent as a livestock marketing specialist. Over the past 25 years, Dr. Ikerd has helped people confronted with the threats of factory farms or CAFOs across the globe. Next, we will have Dr. Jacoby Wilson. Dr. Wilson has over 15 years of experience as an environmental health scientist in the areas of exposure science, environmental justice, environmental health disparities, community-engaged research, including crowd science and community-based participatory research, air pollution studies, built environment, industrial animal production, climate change, and community resiliency. Next, we will have Greg Gunthorp. Greg Gunthorp, along with his wife and his 3 children, own and operate a pasture-based livestock operation in Northeast Indiana. Greg's family has raised pigs on pasture for at least 4 generations. They have one of the largest pasture poultry operations in the country. Then we are going to bring in Monica Brooks, who is the co-founder of Concerned Citizens Against Industrial Agriculture and now heading up Sentinels of Eastern Shore Health, along with other community partners that successfully stopped a 13-house CAFO on the Lower Eastern Shore. So thank you to everyone who signed up, and let's get started in creating a more just food system.
We're here with Dr. Robert Swan Lawrence. He's going to be on the panel with the Q&A later on with the others. But let's get to know him a little bit. Professor Emeritus for the Center for Livable Future. He's a co-founder of PHR, which is known for Physicians for Human Rights that shared the Nobel Peace Prize. So why don't we start there? Doctor, could you talk a little bit about that?
I'd be happy to. Physicians for Human Rights is a group of advocates, investigators, researchers dedicated to applying the science of medicine to investigate, documenting, and exposing human rights abuses around the world. The work that led to PHR sharing the Nobel Peace Prize was our work on eliminating anti-personnel landmines, which turned out to be an enormous public health threat throughout the world. Over 90% of the victims of anti-personnel landmines were not soldiers, combatants. They were innocent civilians, mostly women and children. So in 1997, when that international agreement was passed, the Nobel Committee awarded the Peace Prize to PHR and to 4 other organizations that worked together, and to the woman who had actually done much of the staff work. Today, PHR continues to address problems ranging from children being separated from their parents at the border to protection of health workers around the world who are increasingly threatened in conflict zones where their role in medical neutrality is often ignored rather than honored. And increasingly now, PHR is turning its attention to some of the human rights abuses being brought out by the COVID-19 pandemic.
All right. Why don't we move into your current focus, certainly for this conference, and that is CAFOs. The $64,000 question. Are they a public health risk? What do you say?
They really are. In fact, in 1996, when I founded the Center for a Livable Future and recruited a wonderful staff of fellow public health professionals and researchers, our focus exclusively was on trying to document the public health impact of CAFOs and to eliminate them because of their well-established now hazard to the health of the public. And it comes in many forms. The main issue is the enormous amount of animal waste that is concentrated in these CAFOs. We've gone from 50 years ago when the average farm raised a herd of 40 or 50 dairy cows or had a flock of a couple of hundred chickens or maybe 30 or 40 pigs, to one where now literally thousands and thousands of animals are produced and raised in very confined quarters. And their waste is accumulated to the point where it emits toxic gases, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, other noxious ketones that produce the smell that makes it very difficult for the neighboring communities to survive in their usual way. They have also, because of the misuse of antibiotics in low doses for growth promotion and disease prevention, given the crowded, filthy conditions under which they are raised. Low-dose antibiotics create a perfect storm for the evolution through spontaneous mutations of forms of bacteria that are resistant to medically important antibiotics. So now we have infections with Salmonella, Campylobacter, Yersinia species, E. coli, and so forth, that are very, very difficult, if not close to impossible to treat because of antibiotic resistance. The pollution of air and water and soil by these concentrations of animal waste leads to people exposed to nitrates in their drinking water, which has all kinds of harmful effects. And then the air pollution, in addition to the ammonia and hydrogen sulfide, we also have particulate, small pieces of animal waste and feathers and fur and danders and so forth. And so the people living downwind of these facilities often have much higher rates of asthma, respiratory disease, and so forth. So across the board, they represent a significant public health hazard. And then to top it all off, most of these CAFOs are actually sited in low income and poor communities, and often communities of color that do not have the economic and political power to resist. And so it adds to that burden of disease that is now, of course, being highlighted by the disproportionate impact of COVID-19.
Wow. Let me flip that. Allegedly, a lot of the large producers, of which there are where I'm at in Delaware, say that this is necessary to feed the world. The efficiency of the CAFOs is the only way. What do you think?
Well, it's a lot of hogwash, to borrow from their. Actually, hogwash was pre-CAFO. Back 40 or 50 years ago, before the tremendous increase in concentrated animal feeding operations, we had small producers, 30, 40, 50 hogs on small family farms, but there were many, many times more of these family farms, producing, in the end, the same number of pigs as produced by a few small operations. But they were produced in a way that was integrated in the ecology of the farming community. So their waste was deposited on the pasture as they grazed, rather than collected in open cesspits and then sprayed on corn and soybean fields to rain used to feed the next group of animals. And what we now know is that, first of all, the problem of global hunger is not a problem of lack of food. It's a problem of distribution. And it's a very complicated, and I don't want to go into it in great detail, but suffice to say that if we were to provide, we and other high-income countries, provide seed, appropriate fertilizers, assistance with getting from farm to market. About 35% of food is wasted because in low-income countries, it's mostly wasted because it stays in the field. They can't harvest in a timely way. They can't store the crops appropriately before they get infested with fungus and so on, or they can't get it to market because of inadequate transportation infrastructure. So if we could address those problems, we would not have to export anything from the United States except our expertise and technology to a limited extent. And our funds, that's the important part. Furthermore, we now live in one of the top 10 meat-consuming countries of the world. Argentina is still ahead of us, but we're close behind. And we are consuming far more animal protein than we need or that is good for us. The typical American diet is about 125 grams of protein per day. And we actually need 55 grams. And protein, the high quality protein is available in grains and in many vegetables. So you have perfectly healthy vegetarian or vegans, or as I like to say, flexitarian eaters who have a modest amount of animal products, but they have a healthier diet with plenty of protein. And those are the kinds of diets that we need to propagate around the world. There have been very important scientific studies in the last 20 years showing that the so-called Mediterranean diet, where the pasta or the rice is the centerpiece, the entree, and a little bit of animal product is the condiment set on the side. And we as a country have a large piece of meat or pork chop or chicken breast as the entree, and then a little fringe of vegetables as the condiments. We need to flip that around. If we did that with existing technology, we would be able to feed the world easily by helping low-income, middle-income country farmers feed themselves.
Hi, we're here with Dr. John Ikerd, Professor Emeritus of Agricultural Economics at the University of Missouri. Also an author, Sustainable Capitalism, A Return to Common Sense. Small farms are real farms. So, John, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fine. How about you, Jack?
Good. Good to see you again since your last trip.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Why don't we jump right into it? Here we go. Question number 1. Are CAFOs necessary to meet the needs of the people, of consumers, rural communities, or society in general? What say you?
Well, first of all, the CAFO operators will claim, like industrial agriculture, that CAFOs are necessary to keep the food costs affordable for people. Now, admittedly, there was a significant reduction in the percentage of consumer income spent for feed between the 1970s and the 1990s. But basically, since 2000, food prices have actually gone up faster than the overall inflation rates. And meat prices, where the CAFOs are in play, have gone up even faster than overall food prices. So what's happened the early years of industrial agriculture and the CAFOs, some of those benefits were passed to consumers, but the later years after the big corporations gained control of those industries, then they were able to use their market power basically to drive even the more efficient independent producers out of business. And they've continued to raise the prices for the retail consumers, even though farm level prices continue to go down. So the benefits, whatever economic benefits, have been going to the corporate investors and not to the consumers. Now, they will also argue that regardless of domestic consumers, that CAFOs, even more CAFOs, are going to be needed to feed the world in the future. But that's simply not true either, because we're exporting about 20% of our overall agricultural production, but it's not going to the hungry people of the world. It's going to the areas of the world with the developing economies, with the increasing affluent middle classes, and not going to the low-income people. And in addition to that, which most people don't understand, is about 70 to 80% of the people in the world are not fed by industrial agriculture, certainly not by CAFOs. They're fed by small family farming operations, most of which we would call subsistence farms. And the research also shows that we could double or triple the production on those farms simply by doing many of the things we did in the early 1900s with U.S. farmers in helping develop crop rotations and integrated crop and livestock systems. If they doubled or tripled their production, they could feed the world, feed themselves and the world without industrial agriculture. Now, on the issue of rural communities, they go out into rural communities and they say, well, this is essential for your agricultural economy, regardless of what the benefits to consumers are. But again, that's simply not true, because when the CAFOs come in, they don't invest in the local community. They get their building materials, and construction people come in from outside and put it in place. Whatever tax benefits there are from construction of CAFOs, more than offset by increased local cost of roads and bridges and other infrastructure that's not built to accommodate these large trucks that bring feed in and animals out of those operations. So they don't benefit there. And then on the other things, perhaps more important, they say, well, it's needed to employ people. We employ people in the CAFOs. Well, they employ some people, but what they don't tell you is they displace more independent family farms, because when you consolidate into those larger operations, you have fewer operations, fewer managers, and you also mechanize and routinize the production process so that there's fewer people working, and the people who do have jobs have lower paying jobs. So this isn't about benefits to consumers or rural communities. This is all done to drive corporate profits. That's where the benefits are coming from.
Okay. Do you have time for one more question, John?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, good. Let's approach it this way. Even if CAFOs are motivated more by corporate profits, which you're talking about, than meeting the needs of the people, they've been able to dominate the markets for poultry, beef, pork, and now dairy. Are they a natural result of the free market? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I think we need to recognize that we no longer have what we call, economists would call a free market in agriculture, basically not in any other situation. One of the essential characteristics for the market to work in a way that benefits consumers and society in general is you have to have a sufficiently large number of competitors, of producers, so that no one producer or competitor or processor is able to retain profits for their investors or for themselves, rather than have competition compete those profits away and pass it on to the consumers in terms of lower food prices. We basically in this country quit enforcing the antitrust laws that were necessary for competitive markets back in the 1980s. That's what's allowed these large corporations to continue to consolidate. And in addition to that, so we don't really have competitive markets. There's no way of knowing what consumers would really have preferred. But in addition to that, what we're seeing now is as much a reflection of government programs as it is consumer preferences, because we reoriented the government farm programs and food programs in this country back in the 1970s to support this industrial agricultural system. The industrial agriculture system is very efficient, but it's highly specialized. It requires a lot of upfront investment. It's highly mechanized, which means that it's very risky, as we've seen with the COVID crisis. A disruption anywhere in that system and the whole system collapses. We see the same thing with adverse weather conditions and floods and so on. So the government programs basically come in, just like we do with the big banks. We, the taxpayers, are asked to absorb the risk while the corporations make the profit. And without the taxpayer coming in with generous programs and bailout programs and subsidized insurance and subsidized loans, these CAFOs wouldn't be economically feasible. So it's not a result of free markets, even though they claim that. So, but the CAFO operators will come back and they'll say, well, look, the land-grant universities, USDA, the state departments of agriculture are all promoting CAFOs as the future of animal agriculture. But I point out to them when they say, okay, the government makes it easy for young farmers or beginning farmers to borrow money. They have have guaranteed loans up to 80% or so for a young farmer that wants to go out and build a CAFO. But that's a 20-year payoff period when they get into that. And what I point out to them, with the increasing consumer concerns about public health, environment, animal welfare, and a whole range of other issues that are associated with CAFOs, CAFOs may be totally out of date before those 20-year loans are paid out. And what we see now, the animal welfare, animal rights advocates are being more and more successful, and more people are becoming vegetarian and even vegan because they don't want to eat meat that comes out of CAFOs. And now we see the people that are opponents of animal agriculture joining forces with the climate change folks that are concerned about the contribution to climate change. You see all these things coming together. CAFOs may well not be the future of animal agriculture. They could well mean the end of animal agriculture, because all the animal agriculture in general is being blamed for the problems that are out there with CAFOs. And then the final thing is there's simply no viable alternatives to CAFOs. That's simply not true. There's organic, there's grass-based, there's hormone antibiotic-free, there's humanely raised, there's a whole bunch of other options. But that raises the question, how much more would it cost? What would it cost if we transform the system from CAFO to these alternatives? Well, the research is kind of scant because all these other alternatives are different and they depend on the operation. But I cite frequently, there's a study that was done by the Iowa State University where they compared a deeply bedded hoop house system, which is consistent with all those alternatives that I've talked about, with CAFOs. And they come up with an estimate that year-round production, the CAFOs had about a $3 a head hogs and hog operation advantage over the hoop house system. Well, this $3 advantage, seems like quite a lot to the producer, but when you take that to the consumer level, a 280-pound hog, which would be typical coming out of either one of those operations, would yield about 140 pounds of pork. So if you take that $3, 300 cents, divide it by 140 pounds, that's about 2 cents a pound. That's less than 1% of the retail cost. Now, the producers go to that because that $3 advantage is not just on the amount of hogs they could produce in the hoop house, but the CAFO operator can produce probably 2 to 3 times as many hogs because of the simplified and mechanized operation that they have. So again, the benefits, and the same thing is true in processing. The benefits are very small. The cost savings are pretty small on per head basis going through the system, which is important to the producers and processors. But once you got to the consumer level, most consumers wouldn't even notice the difference. These CAFOs are neither necessary to meet the needs of consumers, the needs of society, and there are alternatives. They're not essential. There are alternatives to CAFOs that we could adopt that would create a much better food system, a much better agriculture, and much more viable rural communities and a stronger society.
Well, that's just the beginning. I'm looking forward to you coming over to the question and answer period with the rest of the folks, and we'll continue this later.
I look forward to it.
Please welcome Dr. Jacoby Wilson from the University of Maryland, College Park, Department of Public Health. Let's talk about EJ communities and the impact of the COVID-19 virus. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I think this is an important time for us to be talking about environmental justice. When it comes to COVID-19, I would be remiss to not mention the current protests that you have in the country. And these things are all connected. What we see is COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted certain communities, Black and brown communities. We see that environmental injustice, by its definition, we're talking about the disproportionate burden of hazards on communities of color, on low wealth communities, on immigrant communities. So we're talking about petrochemical operations, refineries, power plants, paper mills, concrete plants. You have heavily trafficked roadways. You also have the issue of goods movement, ports. You have the issue of chicken farms in the Eastern Shore, hog farms in North Carolina, chicken farms and hog farms in Iowa, cattle feedlots. You have populations across the country who are being used as sinks for pollution. Literally, their ecosystems are used as sinks for pollution, and their bodies are being used as sinks for chemical contaminants and other contaminants. So you're thinking about environmental injustice, like what is it? It's really talking about how some communities, because of their skin color, because of their lack of political power or economic power, they end up being disproportionately burdened by these hazards. But at the same time, they are also underserved by health promoting infrastructure. So you get back to the COVID-19 pandemic. Why has it hit the Black community so hard? Why has it hit Hispanic community so hard? It's because of the underlying sort of social determinants of health. And what I could call, we talk about structural inequalities in this country. We're really talking about structured inequalities. This country has been structured to have where we have haves and the have-nots. And so the have-nots are hosting many of these hazards. The have-nots do not have access to good food infrastructure. You talk about the concepts of food deserts and food swamps, right? Why don't these communities have access to this infrastructure. We're saying, well, we see higher rates of death, morbidity, and mortality related to COVID-19 among people who are obese. Those folks are disproportionately people of color. Well, why are they obese? Well, they have bad diets and bad eating behaviors. No. They live in communities that don't have access to grocery stores. They don't have access to supermarkets. They can't really grow food in the ground. They have good urban agriculture because they have too much contamination. So context matters. Place matters. They also don't have access to really good mass transit. And we think about COVID-19 when it comes to mass transit. A lot of our essential workers, these are, when you think about capitalism, the have-nots, for the system to work, the have-nots have to work, right? So we're sending gig workers, retail workers, essential workers, transit workers, grocery store workers, restaurant workers, sanitation workers, all these healthcare workers. These folks are disproportionately people of color. So they don't have the opportunity to sit at home like me right now to this interview and not be exposed to SARS-CoV-2 virus, right? They have to go out and work. So when they're going out on mass transit, guess what they're doing? They're in environments where they've been exposed potentially to asymptomatic and symptomatic individuals because of being in that tight microenvironment. So you think about crowding on transit, you increase your risk of exposure, right? So that's an important issue that when we think about why people are being disproportionately impacted. So they're essential workers. They have lack of access to infrastructure like food. They also have lack of access to good healthcare infrastructure. There's studies upon studies have shown that people of color have are uninsured and uninsured, and when they do have access to healthcare infrastructure, it may be poor quality, and maybe a lack of cultural competency. And let's just get back to historical reasons why you may see a lack of utilization of healthcare resources. Tuskegee syphilis study. There's a lot of mistrust in the Black community when it comes to medical science, when it comes to research. So because of that broken trust, people are not sure if they should get tested, right? So even though they know they may need to, that trust factor is a big issue. And let's think about the issue of communities that are overburdened by environmental hazards when it comes to air pollution. Recent Harvard studies show that long-term exposure to PM2.5, that's particulate matter, that's basically dust in the air that can get into your lungs, damage your lung sacs, damage your alveoli, can get into your circulatory system. PM2.5, 2.5 microns, can cause asthma attacks, it can cause heart disease, it can cause stroke, it can cause Alzheimer's, it can contribute to diabetes, it can cause cancer, it can increase infant mortality, lead to birth defects in low birth weight babies, it can increase morbidity, increase mortality, and decrease life expectancy. So that study showed that folks with long-term exposure to PM2.5 have a higher risk of mortality after they've been infected by COVID-19. So why is that? The lung sacs have been damaged. Your lung capacity has been diminished. So if you have this underlying health condition, whether it be asthma, COPD, or some other respiratory condition, or some underlying pulmonary condition, you're going to be at a higher risk of dying from that infection. And also studies have shown that PM2.5 can carry the virus long distances. So the social distance is good, but it may not be enough because if you have virus stuck to these particles, it can move farther. It can be in the air longer. So that's why it's important to understand the connection between environmental injustice, air pollution, and the morbidity and mortality rates that we see in these communities. And so getting back to this idea of structural inequalities in this country, getting back to why people are protesting. People are protesting structural racism. People are protesting how Black and brown bodies are treated, whether it be the heinous murder of George Floyd that many of us saw on camera. I've still not watched the video because I don't want to see another Black man murdered on camera. That dehumanizes him even further, right? You see other examples in Georgia where a young man was hunted down, right, while he was jogging. A young lady, EMT, killed in her home. The young man who was killed in the last 2 years in his home eating ice cream. And no justice. You're hearing people saying no justice, no peace. So I'm talking specifically about how Black and brown bodies, individuals have been treated. But you can apply that to a population level. You can apply that to a community level. So we're saying is, how are we going to humanize people? How do we value people more? And we can take this issue to what communities dealing with concentrated animal feeding operations. Why are we dumping so many of these facilities in these communities? Studies in North Carolina show that, for example, hog farms disproportionately burden people of color and low wealth populations in North Carolina. We know the issues around water quality and folks living in unincorporated areas in Delaware when it comes to living near chicken processing plants. We know that these facilities can impact us in many ways. So you think about the economic issues where when you live near one of these facilities, your value of your home goes down. You can't sell, you're underwater. You can't sell your house, you get stuck in that home. You could be living in a facility where the chicken waste particleizes. What that means is it becomes particles, becomes windblown. It gets blown into your yard. You can't garden, you can't enjoy your property. It gets blown into your house, okay? You also have the issues of the air quality impacts. You're being exposed to volatile organic compounds, but you're being exposed to other compounds that can impact air quality, impact human health, cause asthma. Of course, you're being exposed to water quality issues. Many folks who live in these facilities are basically on well water. So if you have runoff or windblown material that gets into your well, you're going to be exposed to chemicals like nitrates. Think about blue baby's disease, right? And other impacts that nitrates can have on human health. So it's the air quality impacts. It's the water quality impacts. It's the fact that you may be creating superbugs as well, right? So think about bugs that are bacteria that are resistant to some, like MRSA, for example, or other organisms. You could have viruses that you be exposed to. I mean, part of the concern with this virus is the fact that it's not just impacting communities in urban areas, it's impacting folks in rural areas too. It's impacting folks who work in our meatpacking industry. And what COVID-19 has made visible is folks who we made invisible due to our policies, the lack of protections, our lack of compliance, our lack of governance. We had poor working conditions pre-COVID-19 in meatpacking plants, where folks' rights weren't being protected, anti-union movements in these facilities, people's voices not being heard, immigrants being abused, women being abused, high rates of musculoskeletal injuries on those lines, right? People been exposed to animal matter and taking those exposures back to the home pre-COVID-19. OSHA not doing enough to inspect these plants, and owners getting away with basically exploiting their workers. So these workers were exploited before COVID-19, and they've been exploited right now during this pandemic. Why are we forcing people to choose between their job and their health? And not just their health, not just their life, the lives of their family members. When they get exposed, whether it be asymptomatic or symptomatic, they can take that home to them, to their wife, to their children, to a newborn baby. That's a lack of respect being shown to humanity of these workers in the meatpacking industry and on the lines in the industry, and also the livestock workers who are working at the farms. Any agricultural workers who are working on farms. So that's a social justice issue. That is also an environmental justice issue. And what we're really talking about is human rights, right? We need to show that we value each other, uplift each other. And so I think that's a big issue why, when you talk about environmental justice, we're not just talking about social justice and improving the environment. We're talking about humanity, human rights, and making sure that all people are being treated equally. And it's important for us to focus on how COVID-19 is ravaging rural communities who are really these hosts to agriculture operations, intensive animal agriculture, and also our worker population who are working on the farms and also at the facilities that are processing the chickens. I'll stop there. Sorry.
That's okay.
That's one breath.
No. Well,
Okay.
Dr. Wilson, and I want to hear more. And
Yes.
you're going to be on the panel with some, experts from all over the country. But I think you've given us enough to say everybody should go here if you're concerned about what's going on in the world, particularly the United States, right now. So, Dr. Wilson, thanks.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, this is your host, Jack Bucchione. We're visiting Greg Gunthorp in northeastern Indiana. Greg, you have a pasture-based operation with pork, poultry, turkeys, and you process all this on your farm. Can you talk to us a little bit about this?
Sure. Greg Gunthorp, Gunthorp Farms. We have a family farm in outside of LaGrange, Indiana. My family has raised pigs on pasture for at least 4 generations. In 1998, my wife and I sold pigs for less than what my grandpa sold them for in the Depression. The hog industry consolidated, kind of left us behind. we decided that we didn't want to quit raising pigs. So we pursued some restaurant customers. So we raise pigs, chickens, ducks, and turkeys on the farm. We have a USDA inspected processing plant, I believe one of only 3 in the country on farm that processes both red meat and poultry. And up until about 3 months ago, our primary customer base was upscale restaurants in Chicago, Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, Ann Arbor, within our region. We employ about 30 full-time people on the farm, and we've been direct marketing for about 20 years.
Wow. Greg, the virus, COVID-19, you're an independent farmer. How did that rock your world?
I tell everybody it was like a train wreck. I jokingly tell people now that we thought we were diversified in our marketing before the coronavirus. We sold to upscale restaurants, we sold to a charcuterie shop, some universities, a restaurant at Chicago O'Hare Airport, and a restaurant at Disney. And overnight, all of them closed.
Wow.
We were really fortunate in that we were able to flex, had enough contacts in the industry that we were able to transition to now we sell primarily retail. It has been a huge transition. We made more changes in 2 weeks than I think that we would have planned on making in 2 years. We cut, portion, package everything into most of it into net weight packages now. 1 pound packages where we used to send it all out bulk. So it's way more labor. It's way more complicated labeling. It's all of it gets boxed now. All of it's going in different directions with our trucks with LTL carriers. So it's just whole different system. We're doing some online shipping now and some fulfillment, which is a whole different set of marketing than what we used to do before. In some ways, I wish the whole thing would kind of go back to a little bit more normal, but I imagine it probably never will.
Yeah. Greg, Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren are putting legislation in to eliminate the factory farms. How do you feel about that?
I think that Senator Booker and Senator Warren are big fans of the independent traditional family farm, and the independent traditional family farm has been largely left behind in this concentration and consolidation. 20 years ago, I told you that we probably didn't need to put controls on large industrial farming that the little guys could compete. But the reality is the little guys don't get a fair shake in the marketplace. Right now is an excellent example. We have 4 companies control about 85 to 86% of the beef market, and while stores' shelves are empty or very limited supply, prices have went through the roof to consumers. Prices have dropped drastically to the farmers. That would not have happened if we'd have had more players in the market. We're even while we're seeing these issues with not even being able to for the industry to handle all of the animals, and they're euthanizing animals at the farm. We're seeing permits being applied for large confinement operations. So, at some point, the whole thing becomes greed. They want 100% of the industry, and once they build these, they go broke. But they sell it for pennies on the dollar to the next guy. We're seeing that in the dairy industry. 10,000 to 70,000 cow dairies Those operations never sit empty. It's the 100 to 300 cow family farms that have to quit because of massive oversupply. So at some point, the government either needs to enforce antitrust laws and ensure that there's a fair, competitive, open, transparent market, or in order to have a resilient and secure food supply, they probably need to set a limit on how large milk, meat, eggs, and poultry operations can get. We don't need a handful of operations. The current scale of pigs is such that 800 farrowing sites in the country could raise all of the pigs. Processing is worse. 40 slaughter plants in this country slaughter about 90% of the hogs. 27 slaughter plants slaughter about 85% of the cattle. 10 weeks ago we couldn't have the discussion. Now we can have the discussion. It's not a resilient or secure food supply, and something needs done.
Okay, and from what I understand, you and your daughter are doing something about it. Politics from the pasture? What's that all about?
Me and my daughter have a Facebook group. We've both been involved in quite a bit of advocacy work around farmers, regenerative agriculture, small processors, the local food scene. My daughter serves on the Northeast Indiana Local Foods Board. My son serves on the board of the Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network. I've been involved in advocacy for a long time, served on President Clinton and Secretary Glickman's USDA Small Farm Commission, do a lot of work with the American Grass-Fed Association, the Organization for Competitive Markets, the National Farmers Union. In our Facebook group, which I'd recommend everyone join, just attempts to educate consumers and producers on all of the issues that around local food and how the deck is actually stacked against us, and what kind of policy changes that should be enacted at the local, state, and national level to ensure that both the small farmers and small processors get a chance, but also so that farmers and consumers get options in the marketplace, and that we have the ability going forward to have a resilient food supply so that we actually have food security in this country.